It's Paul Adams from Branson Adams, and I'm here today to do another three things, which is three things in a local businessman or celebrity's life that have made a difference to them. And I'm joined today by Peter Gordon, who I would describe as a consummate radio professional. I'm not sure how he would describe himself. So, hello, Peter.
I think I'd have a problem spelling consummate, to be honest. I had a problem saying it there for a moment. Yes, it was very kind. That's a kind remark. I think that's on the more positive end of the scale that someone could say. Certainly radio, that's for sure. I've been doing that. Whether it's been consummate, whether it's been professional, in the end, that's for others to judge.
Well, I've woken up with you for 24 years.
Well, yeah. Well, there you are. What can I say? Well, I don't know. I take that as a compliment, actually. I wouldn't have said that everyone has been able to say that. Yes, that's been pretty much on Eagle Radio, which, yes, we're in our 25th year now of broadcasting. I've been doing radio, and most of that breakfast radio, either as a newsreader or as a presenter, pretty much since around 1990, 91. So there's a few more years to add on to the end of that, I'm afraid.
Well, I suspect the first time I came across you may have been at a Carol concert, and you were probably wearing a mouse outfit.
Yes, yeah, actually, that's true. You're referring to the mascot, Brewster the Mouse, who was the old County Sound Radio mascot, and County Sound Radio ran the local broadcast license from 1983. I joined in with them sort of towards the end of their time in around 1990, and there was Brewster the Mouse was out once with yours truly alongside Brewster the Mouse, without giving the game away. Interestingly enough, I never went in that again. I'm not entirely sure whether or not that was my own doing or whether or not someone decided that I shouldn't be in it, but there we go.
Oh, it's way below your skill set.
The funny thing was at the time, which was really pretty much right at the beginning of the radio career thing, I really was open to. I was more than happy just to do whatever was needed to be done. I'd been at university for a few years. I'd done university radio in New York, and that had included also some professional work with the local BBC there. But I come back down south, and in those days, there weren't these media courses and things that you have around. There wasn't really a route apart from, which is what I did, writing around and ending up and going making coffee, which is what I used to do for, I think, the first 6 months or so. I used to make coffee for the guys in the newsroom, in Woking as it was then for County Sound. And then one day someone said, actually, your voice sounds okay. Do you want to do this report? And it went from there, really, and sort of went quite quickly, looking back. It went quite quickly from that point onwards. I think sometimes maybe once you've found your right slot, it's like getting on a conveyor belt. Suddenly you're off, whereas everything else had seemed a bit sticky. I'd done a few months in the city as an international insurance broker, and I remember clock watching during that. And so I think, therefore, when you do find your thing, now with several years of hindsight, I do think things suddenly then take off if you found your slot.
Stick with this for a minute. Did you ever find you had a hard decision to make, to say, yes, I want to be morning presenter, or yes, I'll present the news?
No.
So it was just really natural.
Yeah, I think, and it's something I still say to people today. And actually, I have to be honest with you, I try to also still have these days is, if an opportunity comes along, there are sometimes you have to look more carefully, particularly maybe if you're older or perhaps you've got other people to think about around you. But if the opportunity is there, it's normally there for a reason, I think. So certainly back at the beginning, when I was gloriously young, free and signal, and all the other things, and also didn't have a real map ahead of me. I just saw I saw an opportunity as another experience. It was another one to put on the CV. Not necessarily dressing up as a mouse, as a mascot. Understand that. That was more of a slightly more left field opportunity that came along. But no, I always also, when it came to broadcasting, when it came to radio, when it came to media, I always also wanted to be able to say that I could have multi-skills. So I could read the news, I could talk about sport, I could present music radio, I could do politics, et cetera, because I just thought that would always give you a better chance of staying within it, actually.
So should we go back to where you started? Because I've heard you described as a local boy made good. So where did you grow up? Where did you start?
So I was born in Guildford. I mean, Guildford is it's a very strange, has a strange magnetism for me, both from a practical level, but also just because it does feel like my manor, and I feel very comfortable and relaxed in and around the area. I was born in Mount Alvernia, and as I sit to you today, where I'm from my living room, which is where I've been broadcasting from for a number of weeks, I am, as the crow flies, I'm about 3/4 of a mile from my birthplace, just out the window here. The family, we were living in Pyrford at the time, though. We were living at the top of a hill called Pine Tree Hill. And I was there until about sort of 4 or 5. And then Mum and Dad, we moved to Guildford, and they were in their house in Guildford from around 72 to 99. So born in Guildford, barring a little bit of time in Perth, I don't remember that hugely, but a few bits. But most of the time was therefore definitely growing up in Guildford, and was very lucky, in a road which one end, if you walked down that road and then you walked into town, you were in the town in a quarter of an hour. You walked up the other end of the road, you were into just rolling countryside. It's the big attraction of Guildford, of course. It's that it's the thing about the town, and Guildford's always been the place where people used to stop off at, because they would stop off halfway down from London on the way to the south coast, and it had its charm even back as far as then, I think.
Indeed. So, I mean, we arrive at your first of your three things, which is your parents. And obviously, our parents always have influences on us as individuals.
Yeah.
Specific to you, I mean, what are your memories of your parents, and what their big influences on you?
I always remember huge amounts of laughter. Often, I think, encouraged by Dad's homemade wine. Not for me, obviously, as a boy. But I used to love that. So if everyone else was laughing around me, then everything's fine with the world. So the ability to laugh at not just good times, but also maybe during some bad times and tough times, has pretty much stuck with me. I've known the power of laughter, and they very much taught me that, with a sort of abstract, slightly left field humor, quite dry sometimes, but at the same time also fairly clown-like. And both Mum and Dad were like that. I think it's significant. They met in the 50s whilst they were both in an amateur dramatic production of The Ghost Train in Gerrard's Cross, and that's how they met. And I've always thought, that's significant. Dad very nearly was going to become an actor. He was about to go into rep in Windsor, but because he met Mum, he decided that another job offer that had come along. He'd been involved in farming and had become particularly specialised in pea farming. And it was at a time in the 50s where Birdseye, frozen food people, were beginning to understand a bit more about how to store food, freeze food. And they used to consult with farmers. Dad got consulted with around the peas thing, and they took him on. And so he went that way. Mum was a sports teacher, and was therefore pretty good at communication and projecting things, and the two of them sort of bound together, and I'm very lucky that they are still together, and 64 years of marriage this August, and they're both in their 90s, and continue to be a huge influence today.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Do you find yourself saying things or doing things that they used to do?
Yeah. I mean, my father particularly, I mean, the way I speak now is very similar to him. I find myself when I'm doing, not so much when I'm broadcasting, certainly broadcasting on Eagle, sometimes when I'm doing some voiceover work, or maybe some other things that isn't music radio related, I do hear myself. I hear myself a little bit now with him, but certainly public speaking and I do, and it makes me laugh. But I'm proud of that. I think that's fine for me. Why deny? Why deny the influence? And of course, Dad did carry on doing Amdram after his career, so I saw him in many things, including in pantomime, where he was Mother Goose in Mother Goose, but he also played a number of other roles. In some Pinter productions. There's a big production called Conduct Unbecoming, which he picked up a drama festival award in the south of England, which was in Basildon, I think, after he got through a final in Woking. So that all carried on. So clearly, there was a lot of influence there on where things have gone from here on in.
That sounds brilliant, and hopefully you've got a big party planned for them.
Yeah, well, last year we were going to have because they were both 90 last year, so we were going to have a big do, and we were actually going to all go off on a cruise together last August. And unfortunately, 2 or 3 days before, people in their 90s do get ill, and Dad got quite ill, and we couldn't go, so that's been postponed. So obviously, and now at the moment, I was able to, before the lockdown came, I was able to wave at them through the window. And then there's been a lot of technology. They're pretty teched up, actually. I have to say they're pretty teched up. They're not bad on screen time stuff and all that sort of malarkey. They've got into that quite well. So so at some point, once the time is right and it's safe for everyone, there will be some shenanigans and a few bottles of fizz, I would suspect.
Fantastic. So obviously you're sort of growing up in this wonderful environment with your loving parents and laughing your way through life. And you go to school.
Yeah. Well, so here's another interesting thing, and I think this is also part. So there's a crossover of influences here. So I was very lucky growing up in a nice place in Guildford, in a nice house, just off the main road coming out south of Guildford, but with views across to the St Catherine's Ruin, across St Shalford Park. And a big garden, and because I was the youngest of 3, so I've got 2 older sisters, there is no doubt about it. I was left to do more on my own. I had more that I could do, so I would just really enjoy myself playing football with myself in the back garden, using an upturned table and passing balls to myself and things. I had no sort of masses of friends around me at that time. But one of the big decisions that they made was to send me to Cranley School. And that meant, by the way, that they were both working full-time. And in those days, there used to be it's like an insurance policy that you could take out to pay school fees. And, that's one of the priorities they decided to make. I know there were things they didn't do as a result. I know they didn't do big glamorous abroad holidays. We used to go to the Isle of Wight or occasionally Devon. There was lots of things they didn't do, now looking back on it, to allow us to go on and have that sort of education. So Cranley was where I landed in 1975 at the prep school. Had 5 years there, and then a further 5 years at the senior school. So I was Cranley in 75 to 85, and it was just the most extraordinary experience. Now looking back on it, I was very lucky that I had some really great teachers, hugely influential, and once I got into the senior school, it took a little while, because I was fine. I think looking back on it, I wasn't a great sports person. I used to like it, but I didn't get picked for the big teams most of the time. But I used to get involved, but I was never that great. Academically, I was sort of all right, if I wanted to be, which is often the case. I remember distracting a very nice Welshman of a maths teacher I had when I was at the prep school, junior school. I distracted him for almost 35 of the 40 minutes because it was the first lesson back from the holidays, and he'd been back to the Welsh mountains. So I kept him talking for 35 minutes so he didn't do any maths. I was a flipping hero for several days with my friends. Anyway, Senior school took a little bit of time. So I wasn't succeeding massively at everything, but I was doing okay at everything. That was where I was. About a year or so into the senior school, I was plonked in a play. It was an adaptation actually of the Wizard of Oz, and it was sort of panto-like. And I was put in there as the lion, the one without any courage. I remember thinking at the time, well, I'll just do this and see how it goes. And I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I was there pretty much the rest of my time at Cranley Senior School. There was a player term, maybe more sometimes.
But this is your second thing, isn't it? You discovered drama.
Yeah, and that was my thing. It was drama, and also now looking back on it, so that was the way to express it at that time.
Yeah.
But it was performance, actually. That's what I discovered was performance, which of course is a word that means many different things across various different sectors. People talk a lot about business performance, don't they? And they talk about company performance, and they talk about all sorts of things. But the understanding of the psychology of putting yourself across was what I now, looking back on it, found. And well, I mean, it was the bedrock of pretty much everything else that's come ever since. That's why it's the second influence, because it was that important. And in fairness to the staff and particularly some people at the school, they spotted it. And you then link that back to the fact that because Dad had made the sacrifices he'd done, or the priorities he'd made to send me to there, in the hope that that's the sort of thing that happened, well, actually it did, and therefore the project worked out, didn't it? So, yeah, I mean, it was huge, and to be able, I mean, it was amazingly lucky. That's the biggest thing as well. I feel so lucky to have been able to experience that, and the facilities that I was able to use, even back in those days. I mean, these public schools now, I mean, some of the facilities are unbelievable. But even then it was great, some of the stuff I was able to do. And, I did everything from Shakespeare to Alan Ayckbourn to Arthur Sullivan's piece of Box and Cox, and Pinafore for Gilbert and Sullivan. I just did it right across the board. I mean, what an absolute, privilege and a thrill to be able to do that in a safe but creative surrounding.
Did anything stand out? Was there a special show for you, or a special genre?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There were two. One was Captain of the Pinafore. Being Captain Corcoran in Pinafore was quite a thing. And I mean, there was an amazing set. They have a thing there called the Devonport Speech Hall, which is often used as an exam hall, but I mean, it's massive. And the stage was big, and I mean, they built the ship on the stage with decking and everything, and dressing up in the naval costumes. It was just great. So that was great. And then the other one was an outdoor production of Love's Labour's Lost, Shakespeare's, and I was Barone, so I was the main male part in that, and it was set by a lake when we entered the fray by coming in on a boat on a lake. We're at school, for heaven's sake. So those two particularly I thought were significant. Yeah.
And well, everybody knows that you do pantomime, and recently you returned to Shakespeare. Have you done much in between, and did you Shakespeare, because you were brilliant?
Well, thank you. Do I'll tell you something. This links up a little bit with that whole thing about taking opportunities. So that came along, and I remember putting the phone down and actually laughing out loud when someone said, when they said to me, "Look, do you want to have a go at full staff?" I mean, I'm laughing now because I think it's so funny. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean, I stalled it for a couple of days saying, well, let me just have a little think about it. But I mean, I was already done. Absolutely, yes. It was. I then had to do various things to make sure that practically it was going to work and stuff from a work point of view. So to get that, to be full staff in Merry Wives of Windsor, not only now looking back on it, was just such a generous thing for the Guildford Shakespeare Company to do, but they yeah, they picked the right role for me, didn't they? You know, and I felt very at home, rather weirdly, in that role. So, I mean, you know, whatever it was, 34 years on from the last time of actually performing any Shakespeare, and that was at school. It was quite a jump. It was quite a leap. But I loved it. I mean, I loved understanding it. I loved rehearsing it. I loved seeing new things around Shakespeare that I'd never would ever have really got, I don't think. And then, of course, the performing of it in the open air. It was at the miniature railway at the top of Guildford near Stoke Park, which I hadn't really known much about, if I'm honest. I mean, I only live a mile away from it. I just thought it was a genius production, and I thoroughly enjoyed and was very honoured to be part of it.
Is this something we'd like to see more of? More Shakespeare?
I'd love to. I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, of course, I'd love to. Quite where I'd fit and where I'd do things, I don't know. I mean, the trouble is, you go, gosh, Falstaff was my part. And you think, yeah, but what are there others, and what do they look like? So yes, I mean, if the offer came, Paul, it's as always, it would be yes.
It's very completely inappropriate, but I'd quite like to see Peter Gordon's Bottom.
Yeah, that would work. There's a few, isn't there? You know, there's Bottom, and there's Puck, and there's a number of you know, Sir Toby in the 12th Night, and you know, there's a number of roles that are possible here. But we'll just have to wait and see if the opportunity comes along. I'm certainly open to any of that. In fact, I'm open really from any acting point of view now, because that gave me a lot of confidence. Helped with the panto as well. Helped with the panto, actually. It reset me, because I'd done panto for many years, as you said. And then,
as you know, I'm normally in the front two rows at panto.
I very rarely see you there. And slight irony and or sarcasm, or indeed just me being silly. It did change. It reset me a little bit from that. So I think it helped both things, actually.
So, I mean, we touched before we started talking there, we're in the middle of COVID and pantomime may not take place this year.
Yeah.
Does it feature in your plans from thenceforth? So 2021, I guess, if we're allowed out.
Yeah, well, yes, again, you know, I mean, these are easy answers for me because, why not? I mean, you know how it is, and I'm sure it's the same with you, and I'm sure it's been the same with you in business and also in your life. There are just things which are easy answers. And then there are things that just need a bit more thought. And then sometimes, even though they're easy answers, you need to pretend you're giving them a bit more thought. There's a little bit of that. So those are easy answers for me. It's a yes. I mean, I found, you know, being then in my 40s and now into my 50s, you know, some of the most freer times than I can remember in terms of allowing my mind to go, do you know, I could do that. I'd be nervous. I mean, God, you know, with the Shakespeare, I was flipping nervous. I really was. Particularly, you know, in the bit where we started rehearsing, because I joined a company at that time who'd already done one show, not Merry Wives, but another show previously. They were already tight-knit. They had already been together for a number of weeks. I jumped in. Not only were they very warm and welcoming, but, you know, taught me a lot, and were fantastic company, and still keep in touch with all of them a year or nearly a year or so on.
Fantastic. So I guess we should move on, because you've gone through school, and as you already mentioned, you went to university in York.
Yeah, that was yeah. I mean, the younger version of me, and to a certain extent the current version of me, can procrastinate a little bit on the things that aren't the easy answers. So I had this thing, you know, when I left school, I hadn't quite worked things out. I went and did a year off. I needed to retake an A-level, which, by the way, the guys at Cranley did for me without. I just kept going. I had tutorials every week. I mean, it's extraordinary, you know, and I had to pass my English A-level. I hadn't been very well during my A-level, so it had slightly messed up a few things. But I therefore used that retake time to also go and do some other things. So, you know, I went and worked for half a ski season in Switzerland as a plongeur in the kitchen, i.e. the washer upper, and a few other bits and pieces. I then got to the point where the radio thing, wasn't sure if it was gonna happen after university, and that's where the whole insurance broking thing in London came up, which lasted 9 months. Happened to pay for me to then go on a postgrad diploma on the South Coast for journalism. Once again, thinking I just need to get some stuff under my belt, so I'm armed, and through that, and also through the experience that I'd done with County Sound making tea, I suddenly started picking up work. So actually, I was working by the time that diploma finished. So I sort of got into it in the end, but I had a bit of a hiatus of around sort of 18 months getting myself together. And then, as I said earlier, once I'd got the slot, things just moved at a pace. I mean, I was working. I was working. I was committed. I was doing. I wasn't looking at how many hours I was working a day. And in fact, I never have done. The very first day of doing radio, I've never been able to tell you how many hours I've worked today. No idea. Got no idea. And what is work? I don't know.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that about Peter Gordon.
I don't. People say, "Oh, and what time do you knock off?" And I'm thinking, well, I don't really know, because it depends what you mean by knocking off. Physically, I will leave an office in days when we used to have offices, as opposed to being in living rooms. But I mean, I wouldn't have finished. I hadn't finished. I'd just changed positions. And that's when you love what you do, that's what you do, isn't it?
Well, that's normal. I keep a book next to my bed. If I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, "Oh, I've got a bright idea," I'll write it down.
Yeah.
You know what you do, it's there all the time.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when people talk about 9 to 5, and it still does get used a lot, doesn't it? But I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever worked 9 to 5 anymore. I've got no idea. I doubt it.
So tell me about university. What did you study, and how did it go?
So the university thing. So I had originally thought about going to drama school, chickened out of that. Then thought, well, I'll go and read drama at university. I think I've got a place at East Anglia or Bognor. No, not Bognor. Bangor. That's the one. And very different. And chickened out of that. Eventually, somehow, I can't remember how this happened, but I ended up doing a politics degree. Now, I had an opportunity to either go to Oxford Poly, as it was then. I think it's Headington University these days, or York. And frankly, I was being a bit of a snob, and because it wasn't Oxford University, I thought, well, no, I'll go to York University. So I did, and that was it. So that took me up in the days where it took a few more hours to get out there by train than it does now. But so politics at York. Lived in halls for the first year, then moved out with some friends and lived in a lovely place called Fulford, which is just south of the city of York, with a fairly well-known golf course there. Lived there for a couple of years and had a cracking time. I did get a degree in the end. No, I did. I did. I thought I got a 2-2. I thought I was going to get a third.
Desmond.
Yes, indeed. Because I'll be honest, it was a politics degree at the York University, but I spent pretty much the whole time in the campus radio station. So I pretty much ran that station for the best part of a year and a half. And it was there that I obviously cut my teeth and was able to make all the mistakes that I probably still make, and also pick up a little bit of work with the local BBC as well. So uni was about getting stuff ready for down the line as opposed to necessarily getting the degree, but it was useful to get that as well.
So when did you leave uni? What year was that?
1989. So I was there, 86 to 89. And actually now looking back on it, I suppose, yes, I was doing radio-y things from around 1990. So actually it wasn't too long a gap looking at. I remember looking back thinking, God, that was a long time. It wasn't really looking back, and it's funny, isn't it? In retrospect, never quite. Constantine does it in quite a lot. So 89, I finished at uni.
So we've covered the gap between 89 and your third point in 1997.
Yeah.
Which was the death of Princess Diana.
Yeah.
That's it. So talk us through the effects.
So For me, I mean, I've been a huge fan of hers. I think, as any, boy, young man of my age at the time, I think, we, quite big fans of Diana. Um, but that wasn't the point really. When I'd been doing radio for a while by that point. I think I'd just been appointed as a full content director. So, I was responsible for the output of Eagle at that point for the first time, and then have been ever since. So it was a bit of a gig, and I think I was just enjoying being in radio. I was enjoying presenting. I still had news influence quite a lot at that time. I was involved in news stuff as well, which has always been something I've been interested in anyway. And I remember on that night at the end of August in 1997, I'd been at a wedding in London, and I'd enjoyed the wedding, with all that weddings have to offer. And I was sleeping on the floor in someone's living room in Brixton, actually. And I couldn't sleep. There was a guy the other side of the room who was just snoring his head off. So I just couldn't sleep. So I actually put the telly on mute. And as I put the telly on, this news started coming through. It was about 3:30 in the morning. And it was pretty obvious where things were going. And I thought, I am on a floor, not entirely sober, in Brixton, and the biggest news story so far in my broadcasting career is about to go. So I remember that it was £40 in the taxi back to Guildford at that time in the morning. And I arrived back in time to join a video conference. We did have video conferencing then, with other people around the group that Eagle's part of, and then got going. And then there was a week. I mean, what do you do on a commercial radio station which plays a lot of pop music, has a humorous take on life, when you have that sort of tragedy happen? And there'd been, obviously, in many years before, there had been royal obituaries of various things, but there hadn't been anything quite like this. There hadn't. The shock value of it, the importance of it, just generally at a time where things were going through. It was late 90s. There was a lot going on in society then. Tony Blair had just got elected. There was a lot happening, and I remember thinking at the time, I'm not sure I know what to do. But looking back on it, which is why this is important, what a great thing to be in a situation going, I'm not sure what I've got to do, because the only way up from that is finding out what you've got to do. And so I learned more in that 48 hours and then the following week around how to conduct myself, both as a broadcaster and also as a manager of people, probably more than you would have done had I, for several years. So there were two aspects of it: is how do you treat it on the radio station? So I remember we removed commercials; it just wouldn't sound right, and we kept things going. We removed a whole lot of content from the radio station. We restudied the music, etc., etc. And actually, the whole thing really went on for a week. If you remember, her funeral was the following Saturday, and then the following Monday, so 10 days after the accident, I remember going on air and saying, guys, what would you like me to do now? Do you want me to carry on like this, or would you like us to start getting back? Sort of knowing what I thought the answer would be, but I learnt the understanding of how to get you, the listeners' approval at that point. And there was a whole thing about, look, it's been really sad, Pete, but actually, can we start? Because, we've got to carry on with our lives and things like that. So, yeah, understanding how to react to a major incident, major tragedy, understanding how to bring your audience along with you, understanding what's right and what's wrong. And that's why that particular episode and incident, not only just it was the shock value of the whole thing. I think, you know, we always said we never forget. I do think some people have, but I think, you know, you look back at those pictures of the Mall and of the funeral and of the flowers and extraordinary things. And it was a template for things to come in terms of unexpected moments, things that you've got to try and reflect. Because amazingly enough, only 4 years later was 9/11. And then a few years later, of course, was 7/7. And of course, now with COVID-19 and the effect. So I found that incident, because of the time it was and because of where I was in my career and things like that, allowed me to learn a lot of lessons pretty quickly, which have pretty much kept me in good stead right along the way.
No, it was, you know, what you've done over the years is brilliant, and most people listening to this podcast will already know that I missed a lot of what you did at that time, because my wife actually died 11 days before Diana.
Yeah, and I only learned that when you messaged me about it the other day, and I thought I'd thought long and hard about whether or not actually I should take this section out as a result of that. But actually, in a way, I don't know what you think, but it's a very different time for you. But
well, it's 23 years ago, and you remember we walked from Eagle Radio to Phyllis Tuckwell last year.
Yeah,
Wife would have been 50 last year.
Yeah.
And you're talking about experience, and it's all about life experiences.
Yeah.
What happens to us makes us what we are.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot bringing up a 1-year-old and how to deal with people in a slightly different set of circumstances to you. And as I said at the start, 24 years of listening to you, I did miss a couple of weeks then.
Yeah, of course you did. Absolutely. And I mean, once again, and do you know, Paul, this is the whole thing. It's a great reminder that these big world events and this big virus we've got at the moment, you know, is happening all around us, and we're having to cope in the way that we cope with whatever it is we're doing. But also people's lives are also still happening, and the events that happen in life. And it is something you always have to take into account, and particularly also as time has gone by, and certainly around that time, because, you know, the media got a lot of blame, didn't they, for what happened with Diana, rightly or wrongly. Media has got even quicker now, and I think quicker, faster, more dominant. Social media itself has come involved in that as well. And I do think even more now, it's easy to forget. You've got things happening to you which are big because there's a big event going on, but my word, that doesn't stop the other things that normally happen in life going on for individuals.
Well, that's right. We're all individuals. We've all had our trials and tribulations.
Yeah.
I like to think since then, things have got better for both of us in many ways. If I were to ask you to describe what's happened to Peter Gordon from 1998 onwards in a few words, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I had some ups and downs. There's no doubt about it. Certainly in the 90s, and then a little bit into the 2000s. But looking back on it now, I think it's absolutely vital, if you can, to try and learn stuff that isn't a repeated behavior. That's a really big battle, particularly for I think probably for everyone, but I think particularly for those of us that, you know, maybe put ourselves out there a bit, and you've just got to try and make sure that you conquer some stuff, if you possibly can. And I think for the most part, as we sit here now, I think I probably have done that. I certainly think you clearly have done that. I think in our own ways, we both have a larger than life presence. I think practically in your case, and perhaps less so in mine. But I think, therefore, I think, you know, and you know, you and I, you know, we get on well together. We've known each other for a little while now. And I do think birds of a feather flock, and I think for those of us that do have that sort of ability to be garish if we want to be, and persistent if we also want to be. I think I think we also need to remember that the stuff behind the scenes also needs to be looked at from time to time, and I had to learn that a bit.
So moving slightly away from this, given that you're now under lockdown, eating sensibly, losing weight, lots of things are in control, and you're admittedly smaller than me. Can we interest you on the walk from Guildford to Phyllis Tuckwell when we're allowed out in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd love to do that. That'd be great. I mean, I've got to be honest with you, some of the walking I've been able to do, not just during this period, but I thoroughly enjoy it. And it's also, it happens to be very, very good for my blood sugar. So I'm a diabetic, type 2 diabetic. And the walking does unbelievable wonders for me. So I shouldn't stop. So yes, I'll come along, definitely.
Well, as you saw last year, we do tend to stop fairly regularly for
Fine by me. Stop fairly regularly for a crunchy. That'll be fine by me. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we've covered lots of things, and I guess it'd be remiss to ask you, what does the future hold for Peter Gordon, and what hopes and aspirations do you have?
The happiness is the big theme, whatever that looks like, and therefore whatever feeds into that. I'm open to all sorts of things. I'd rather like to be doing things I enjoy than not, obviously, but sometimes that doesn't come your way, so you just have to take that on board. I think eventual life on my second home, which is and has been since I was a kid, is the Isle of Wight. My parents live there now, so I'd certainly like to, I think, finish off down there, and hopefully in the not too distant future, and be able to operate from there if I can. It's a wonderful place. Got a lot of, in the same way that I'm very comfortable, as I mentioned, in the surrounds of Guildford, I'm equally comfortable in my part of the Isle of Wight as well. So I think that's the aims, and see as much sunshine as possible, I think.
Fantastic. One of my former clients is now the district nurse, or one of the district nurses on the Isle of Wight. So pretty well looked after down there. Yeah,
they're very good. No, they're very good down there. And the only other thing would be, I think I'd quite like to do some sharing of experience, some mentoring, some guidance, some understanding of how to maybe spot some pitfalls before they're fallen into, that sort of stuff. So I think that definitely interests me as well, and what that looks like is something that perhaps will crop up over the coming couple of years or so.
I was going to say, whenever you've stood up in front of Biz, besides me calling you Dad and generally heckling you, you've actually been very good.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's something to do, and I think if you've got some sort of practice of communication, and you sort of get how to do it, even regardless of what how good people may think you are, I think if you can use that to the benefit of others, then I think that can really help too.
Peter, is there anything else you want to say? Because we've covered a lot. And
no, I don't think so. I think QPR to win the Premier League in the next 5 to 10 years would be nice. But one can dream.
Well, one day, I'll get you along to Reading. As you may know, your fellow QPR supporters were treated to full hospitality on Boxing Day last year.
Yes.
And John Swift scored a screamer for Reading to win.
Yeah, well, it's because I wasn't there, because I was plodding around on a pantomime stage.
At which point I should say, oh no, you weren't. But
oh yes, I was.
I think we've probably reached the end. Peter Gordon, thank you very much. An absolute pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure of mine as well, Paul. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I very much enjoyed it.